The sun bore down on Hollow Creek like a hammer, flattening the land with heat that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Dust hung in the air, stirred by wagon wheels and boots, and the smell of sweat, horse manure, and stale tobacco rolled like a cloud over the trading post. The little settlement was always noisy dealers shouting their prices, children laughing or crying, dogs barking at one another. But when Eliza Kane stepped into the open with her mare, Dustfire, a strange hush followed her. She didn't look like the type who would command a crowd's attention. Her dress was worn thin at the knees, the hem stiff with dust. The brim of her bonnet sagged, shading a face too pale from hunger. But there was something in her posture, something in the way she squared her shoulders despite the hollowness in her cheeks that made people pause. She wasn't begging. She wasn't whimpering. She was here to make a trade, and the desperation in her eyes burned hot enough to slice through pity. Eliza swallowed, tasting the dryness of her own mouth, and lifted her chin. "I'll trade my horse for food." The words fell heavy, cutting through the mid-afternoon bustle. For a moment, no one spoke. A few children tugged at their mother's skirts, wide-eyed. A peddler froze halfway through unloading a crate of salt pork. One of the card players outside the saloon let his cigarette fall from his lips. People glanced at Dustfire, her shining bay coat now dulled with sweat, her flanks sunken from the long days without enough grain, and then back at Eliza. A low whistle broke the silence. "She's gone mad," a man muttered near the blacksmith. "A horse for a sack of beans? More fool than mad," another replied. "That mare's worth more than any grub this side of the Rio." Eliza heard them, but her hunger was louder. She hadn't eaten more than a handful of wild roots in 2 days. Her ribs ached when she breathed, and her knees threatened to give way under her. Food meant survival. A horse couldn't fill an empty stomach. She waited, her fingers clenched white around the reins, scanning the faces in front of her. Was no one going to step forward? Did they expect her to collapse right there in the dust before they took her seriously? Then the crowd shifted. From the shadows of the livery, a tall figure stepped forward with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who never needed to hurry. His skin was bronze from the sun, his chest broad beneath leather bands adorned with bone beads and painted markings. Long black hair flowed freely past his shoulders, catching in the hot wind, and a hawk feather swayed lightly where it was tied. His dark eyes held no amusement, no cruelty, only a depth that made Eliza feel as though he was seeing something she didn't even know was inside her. The word hissed among the settlers like the crackle of dry brush catching flame. Apache. People edged back, as if distance could shield them from the weight of his presence. Men stiffened, hands twitching toward rifles leaning against walls. Mothers drew children close. A few muttered prayers under their breath. The warrior ignored them. His gaze was fixed solely on Eliza. He stopped a mere step away, the heat radiating from his body mixing with the desert air, and studied her with unsettling calm. When he spoke, his voice was deep and low, carrying easily across the square. "Horse isn't what we need," he said, each word measured, deliberate. His eyes locked with hers, unblinking. "You are." The trading post seemed to freeze. Eliza's breath caught. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard him. The reins trembled in her grip as Dustfire snorted nervously, stamping her hooves against the packed dirt. "Me?" Eliza managed to whisper, her voice raw. A few men barked out sharp laughter. "Well, ain't that something? He'd rather take the girl than the beast." Someone shouted, and the crowd erupted in uneasy murmurs. Some faces showed disgust, others cruel amusement. A few looked away, unwilling to witness what might come next. Eliza's pride flared even as fear surged inside her. She was no prize to be claimed. Hunger had driven her here, yes, but not to sell herself like livestock. Heat rose to her face. As she spat out the words, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think I'm worth less than my horse?" The Apache warrior did not flinch. His expression remained carved in stone, but something shifted in his eyes, not mockery, not pity, but recognition. "Your horse carries you through dust," he said steadily. "But you," he paused, as though weighing something beyond the reach of words. His gaze softened, if only for a heartbeat. "You carry fire. That is worth more." Eliza's chest tightened. Around them, the crowd muttered in restless confusion. Dustfire tossed her head, pulling at the reins. Sensing the tension, Eliza felt the pull of hunger clawing inside her, the sting of humiliation burning her skin, and the unnerving gravity of his words sinking deep into her bones. She had come here to trade away her horse. Yet somehow, she realized with a shiver, the real bargain had already begun, and she was the one being weighed. For the first time in weeks, fear and hope tangled so tightly in her chest she could hardly breathe. The silence after his words felt heavier than gunpowder smoke after a shot. Eliza's cheeks burned, though the desert sun was already merciless. Around her, the townsfolk shuffled uneasily, as if they had all been dragged into something they hadn't asked to witness. The blacksmith's hammer had stilled mid-swing. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, and even the old mutt sleeping in the shade of the saloon stirred, growling low. The Apache warrior stood calm, unmovable, like a stone pillar in the storm of murmurs rising around him. His gaze never wavered from Eliza, not even when a few of the men muttered curses under their breath. "You are what we need." The words still echoed in her skull. Her pride bristled like a cornered cat. Hunger had driven her to desperation, but not this. She wasn't some token to be claimed, not some prize hanging in a saloon window. She pressed her cracked lips together, then spat the words out sharp enough to cut. "You must think me desperate enough to trade myself." A ripple of shocked laughter rolled through the onlookers. One man slapped his thigh, hollering, "She's got fire, that one?" "Careful, Apache, she'll bite harder than a rattler." The warrior remained still, his expression unreadable. Only his eyes shifted, a faint gleam catching the sunlight. His voice was low but carried clear, silencing the laughter. "You call it trade. I do not." Eliza's stomach clenched. Dustfire stamped nervously, jerking at the reins in her hand. She wanted to turn, to walk away, to pretend none of this was happening. But something inside her, the part that hadn't starved yet, the part that refused to break, held her ground. "Then what do you call it?" she demanded. The Apache's lips curved, not quite a smile, but something close. "A choice." Before Eliza could speak again, one of the townsmen, red-faced from whiskey, shoved his way forward. His voice was slurred, but loud. "Ain't no choice here, girl. You sell that horse to me. I'll give you flour enough to keep your belly from hollerin'. You don't need no savage talkin' riddles at you." The crowd murmured, divided, some nodding, others uneasy. Eliza's pulse raced. This was worse than hunger, worse than desperation. She was being pulled like a rope in a tug-of-war, her dignity stretched to breaking. She looked from the drunk to the Apache. One offered flour and mockery, the other spoke of choices she didn't understand. The warrior's voice came again, calm but carrying an edge sharp enough to silence even the drunk. "Your horse will die under men like him, and you will wither here." His eyes locked on hers, steady as iron. "I see strength. They see weakness. Decide which truth you want to live in." Eliza's breath hitched. His words were an insult, a challenge. And yet beneath them lay something strange, not pity, not hunger for possession. Something heavier, recognition. Her knees trembled, but she forced steel into her spine. "You speak as if you know me." "I know fire when I see it," he said simply. The crowd tensed at his calm certainty. Some men gripped their rifles tighter. "Eh? woman hissed to her husband, urging him to pull her away from the square before trouble erupted, but Eliza didn't move. She wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream all at once. She had come here to trade, to barter survival in the simplest of terms. And yet now, under the blazing sun, with the eyes of the whole town fixed on her, she realized her hunger had brought her to something far more dangerous. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. "You ask me to choose. Between what?" "Between hunger and chains?" The Apache tilted his head, and for the first time, his voice softened, almost like a whisper meant for her alone. "Not chains, a path." The crowd erupted again, shouts, curses, nervous laughter. A rifle clattered as a man fumbled with it, his nerves getting the better of him. Dustfire reared slightly, neighing, nearly yanking the reins from Eliza's blistered hand. She backed up a step, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Fear coiled in her belly, but so did something else, something she hadn't felt in weeks. A spark. A dangerous, treacherous spark of hope. Yet she couldn't give him what he asked, not now, not in front of everyone. She straightened, her chin high despite the tremor in her hands. "I'll keep my horse. And my fire." The words weren't as strong as she wished, but they were hers. The Apache warrior inclined his head, the faintest nod of acknowledgement, then stepped back into the shadow of the livery. The crowd slowly returned to its bustle, but unease lingered in the air like smoke. Eliza stood alone, trembling, Dustfire's reins clenched in her hand. She hadn't gained food. She hadn't sold her horse. But somehow, she knew the day had shifted the course of her life. She just didn't know yet where it would lead. The sun dipped low over Hollow Creek, bleeding the sky with streaks of crimson and gold. By the time the shadows stretched long across the town's dusty street, Eliza had found herself pushed to the edges of it all. No one spoke to her. No one offered her so much as a scrap of bread. She sat on the hard ground near the water trough, Dustfire tethered beside her, the mare lowering her head to drink. Eliza cupped a handful of the lukewarm water to her own lips, swallowing greedily even though it tasted of rust and dirt. It wasn't food, but it kept her alive for one more hour. Her stomach cramped painfully, twisting with hunger. The scent of frying bacon drifted from the saloon, making her mouth water until she thought she'd choke. She dug her nails into her skirt and forced herself to look away. They were watching her. She could feel it, furtive glances from men leaning against posts, from women peering through windows. She was the subject of whispers now, the foolish girl who had nearly sold her only horse, the one the Apache warrior had claimed with words that still lingered in the air like smoke. Eliza pulled her bonnet lower, trying to shield herself from their stares. Two men approached from the saloon, their boots dragging in the dust. Both smelled of whiskey, their shirts stained with grease and tobacco. One leaned toward her with a crooked smile. "That mare's looking mighty tired," he slurred. "How about you sell her to us for a song, sweetheart? Or maybe you've got something else to trade?" The other laughed, a rough, ugly sound. Dustfire whinnied uneasily, tugging at the reins. Eliza's pulse quickened. She pressed her back against the trough, her hand tightening on the rope as if it were the only anchor she had. "Leave me be," she whispered, her voice sharper than she felt. The men took another step closer, their shadows falling across her. A low voice cut through the air, steady and firm. "You heard her." The drunk stiffened. Eliza looked up to see him, the Apache warrior, standing only a few feet away. He was bare-chested, his skin bronzed and gleaming in the last light of the sun. His long black hair stirred in the evening wind, feathers swaying. Bone beads clinked softly as he crossed his arms over his broad chest. The men muttered curses under their breath, but neither dared meet his eyes for long. They slunk back toward the saloon, stumbling as they went. Eliza's breath shuddered out. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been gripping the rope until her fingers ached out. The warrior's gaze fell to her. "Stay in this town," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of certainty, "and you will be pulled apart by men like them. They see weakness in you. I do not." Eliza bristled, though his words sent a shiver through her. "And what you see, then?" she asked, forcing her voice not to tremble. He studied her for a long moment. The firelight from the saloon lanterns caught in his eyes, making them glimmer like polished obsidian. "Strength? Fire," he said simply. "But strength wasted here will be the death of you." She wanted to argue, to tell him she could take care of herself. But the truth was bitter. She had nothing left. No family, no food, no coin. Only a horse she loved too much to sell and a hunger that gnawed at her bones. "And if I follow you?" she whispered before she could stop herself. The warrior's face softened, though his posture remained unyielding. "Then your story will not end hungry in the dust." Her heart thudded hard in her chest. Dustfire nudged her shoulder as if sensing the weight of the moment. Eliza looked around. The town one last time, the shuttered windows, the suspicious eyes, the laughter spilling cruelly from the saloon. She saw no kindness there, only survival carved out of other people's suffering. Her stomach twisted again, sharp as a knife. Hunger had brought her this far. Maybe it would push her one step further. She lifted her gaze back to him, searching his face, but found no mockery, no lies. Just certainty. And for the first time since her father's death, Eliza Kane wondered if she was meant for more than withering in the dust. The dawn broke hard and cold, a pale light spilling over the jagged ridges of stone. Eliza tightened a worn leather strap on Dustfire's bridle with hands still trembling from the night before. She hadn't slept. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but it was the weight of choice that had kept her awake. Stay in Hollow Creek, with its leering men and shuttered windows, or follow the Apache warrior into the unknown. When he came for her at first, light, standing at the edge of town like a shadow born from the desert itself, she knew the decision had already been made. Something in his certainty pulled her, even against reason. They rode in silence at first, Eliza on Dustfire, the warrior, walking beside her with the ease of a man born to the land. His steps were unhurried, but steady, as though the desert itself bent to his rhythm. He carried no map, no compass, only the calm assurance of someone who knew every rock and ridge. The farther they rode, the more the town shrank behind them. Soon Hollow Creek was nothing but a smudge of smoke on the horizon. Eliza stole glances at him, trying to fit words to the image. Muscular shoulders caught the morning sun, every scar a story she dared not ask. His long black hair, tied back with strips of rawhide, lifted in the wind. Bone necklaces clinked softly against his chest as he moved. Finally, curiosity overcame her silence. "Do you always walk?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. He glanced at her, one corner of his mouth tilting slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. "I walk when I am not certain if the one I lead will follow." The answer stung, but Eliza couldn't deny its truth. She had agreed to leave, yes, but every step of Dustfire's hooves felt like gambling her life. The desert opened before them, endless stretches of red earth, dotted with sagebrush and mesquite. The sun climbed higher, and heat shimmered in waves. Vultures circled lazily in the sky, their shadows gliding across the land. By midday, her lips cracked deeper, her body swayed with exhaustion. Dustfire stumbled once, and Eliza's heart clenched. The Mara needed rest as much as she did. The warrior noticed. Without a word, he handed her a water skin. She drank greedily, the coolness a shock against her parched throat. "Why me?" she asked. Suddenly, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, he didn't answer at first. He watched the horizon, scanning as though the land itself spoke to him. At last, he said, because when hunger pressed on you, you stood tall. Others would crawl. You still carry fire. Eliza swallowed, uncertain if the words comforted her or weighed heavier. By the third evening, they entered a canyon carved deep into the rock. The air cooled, shadows long and welcoming. The sound of water trickled faintly, a creek hidden among the stones. Then she heard it, children's laughter. High, bright, and startling in the silence of the desert, Eliza pulled Dustfire to a halt. Around the bend, firelight flickered. Dozens of figures moved, women tending fires, men sharpening arrows, children chasing one another in the dust. Teepees rose like pale triangles against the cliffs, smoke curling lazily into the twilight. Her chest tightened. She hadn't imagined this. She hadn't prepared herself for an entire Apache camp. Every eye turned as they entered. The laughter stilled. Whispers rippled. Men rose from where they crouched, hands instinctively reaching for weapons. Women gathered children close, their gazes sharp with suspicion. Eliza felt small, out of place, her ragged dress and pale skin marking her instantly as outsider. Dustfire snorted, uneasy under the weight of so many stares. Taza stepped forward, raising his hand in a gesture of calm. His voice rang strong across the camp. "She comes with fire," he declared in his native tongue, though Eliza understood enough to feel the weight of his words. He turned to her, eyes steady, and with her, perhaps, survival. The murmurs rose higher, disbelief and curiosity mingling in the air. Eliza's heart pounded. She had thought her gamble ended when she left Hollow Creek. Now she realized it had only begun. The silence in the Apache camp pressed against Eliza's chest like a weight. Every pair of eyes seemed to pin her in place, stripping her bare of every shred of dignity she thought she still carried. She gripped Dustfire's reins until her knuckles ached, wishing she could melt into the mare's shadow. The warrior Taza. She finally learned his name from a child who whispered it and stood tall beside her. He was a wall of calm in the storm of suspicion. "You will not sleep here tonight until they see what you are made of," he told her quietly, his voice like stone under the twilight. Her throat went dry. "What do you mean?" Taza didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured to an older woman who emerged from the firelight. Her hair, streaked with silver, fell in long braids, and her gaze was sharp enough to cut. She carried herself with the authority of someone who had seen countless seasons of drought and war. The murmurs stilled as she approached. The woman stopped before Eliza, studying her with an intensity that made Eliza want to shrink into the dust. Then she spoke in words Eliza couldn't understand. Taza translated. "She says if you wish to eat from their fires, you must work as they do. No one is fed for free." Eliza swallowed hard. "What must I do?" The woman pointed to a pile of freshly cut logs near the fire, heavy and rough. Eliza's stomach twisted. She hadn't eaten in days, and her limbs felt like twigs, ready to snap. Still, she nodded, set Dustfire's reins aside, and walked toward the pile. The camp watched. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts. Men stood with crossed arms, faces unreadable. Eliza bent, wrapping her raw hands around the first log. Pain shot through her arms, but she lifted. Her breath came ragged, sweat stinging her eyes. She staggered, nearly dropping it, but forced herself forward. Step by unsteady step died by the time she reached the fire and dropped the log. Her chest burned as though she'd swallowed coals. Yet she turned back for another. Log after log she carried, her body screaming in protest. Her dress clung with sweat, her knees wobbled, her vision blurred. But she refused to stop, not while their eyes bore into her, not while Taza stood watching. On the last log her legs buckled. She fell to her knees, dust biting into her skin. A ripple of murmurs passed through the camp. Some laughed, others whispered, but one of the children darted forward, eyes wide, and offered her a small hand. Eliza blinked at the child, then pushed herself up without taking it. Her muscles trembled violently as she staggered to the fire and dropped the final log with a hollow thud. The old woman stepped forward again, studying Eliza with a face of stone. Then slowly she nodded once. She spoke, her voice carrying across the camp. Taza's lips curved slightly as he translated. She says you may eat. Relief flooded Eliza so quickly she nearly wept. But pride kept her chin high, even as her body begged for rest. They brought her a wooden bowl of stew, thick, smoky, filled with beans and rabbit. The first mouthful nearly undid her. Tears burned her eyes as warmth spread through her hollow stomach. She ate slowly, every bite a battle not to devour like an animal. Children crept closer, curiosity overtaking fear. One reached out to touch her ragged dress, another pointed at her hair. The women whispered to each other, their gazes less sharp now, though still guarded. Through it all, Taza stood near the fire, silent, watching. When the bowl was empty, he finally spoke. You stood when they expected you to fall. That matters here. Eliza glanced at him, unable to read the expression in his dark eyes. Gratitude, maybe. Or warning. The camp slowly returned to its rhythm. Fires crackled, drums thudded in the distance, and stars spilled across the black sky. But Eliza knew one thing with chilling clarity: she was being measured. Every movement, every word, weighed like gold on a scale, and in this place, one misstep could cost more than hunger. The desert night was never truly silent. Coyotes yipped in the distance, owls hooted from the cliffs, and the low hum of drums carried faintly through the Apache camp. Eliza lay on a thin mat near the fire, her body aching from the worksheet. Endured. Every muscle screamed for rest, but her mind spun too fast for sleep. She could feel the weight of their stares, still watchful, judging, waiting for her to falter. Even now, women murmured as they ground maize. Men sharpened blades in the firelight, and children whispered in the shadows. She was tolerated, not accepted. Taza sat across the fire, silent as stone. His dark eyes caught the flames, unblinking. The bone necklace on his chest glowed orange with the shifting light. He hadn't spoken to her since she'd eaten, yet she knew he hadn't stopped watching. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered. A cry rose near the edge of camp, high, urgent and panicked. Horses. Eliza bolted upright as warriors leapt to their feet, bows and spears at the ready. A small group of figures stumbled into the firelight, dragging behind them two young Apache boys. Their hands bound with rope. Behind them came three white men, drunk on arrogance and whiskey. Their clothes were ragged, their faces half hidden beneath dusty hats, but their rifles glinted clear enough. Found a surprise, boys, one of them sneered, shoving a boy forward. Little thieves trying to take what ain't theirs. A hush fell over the camp, broken only by the crackle of fire. The warriors held their weapons steady, but no one moved. Not yet. Eliza's breath caught. She knew men like these men who treated human lives as wagers in a game. She'd seen them swagger through Hollow Creek, boasting of scalps and spoils. One of the men's eyes fell on her. He barked a laugh. Well now? What's this? Didn't know Apaches were keeping white girls. Heat rushed to her cheeks, but before she could speak, Taza rose to his full height. The firelight painted his muscular chest in bronze and shadow, tribal jewelry catching the glow. He stepped forward, unflinching, his long hair lifting in the night wind. Let them go, he said, his voice like stone grinding against stone. The leader spat in the dirt. Or what? You'll put an arrow in me? We'll shoot these boys dead before your bow's even drawn. A standoff. The camp tensed, every man, woman, and child holding their breath. Eliza's heart thundered. She wasn't a warrior, but she knew cruelty when she saw it. And she knew weakness. These men were drunk, their balance uneven. Their hands careless on the rifles before fear could paralyze her. She moved. Her eyes darted to the fire where an iron pot of stew still simmered. With every ounce of strength left in her battered body, she seized it. The metal scorched her palms, but she ignored the pain. With a ragged cry, she hurled the pot toward the leader. The boiling stew splashed across his chest and face. He screamed, dropping his rifle as he clawed at his burning skin. The other two turned in shock, their grip on the boys loosening. That was all it took. Taza lunged, faster than her eyes could follow, his hand closing around a spear. In one motion, he struck, knocking a rifle clean from its owner's grasp. The warriors surged forward, a storm of arrows and blades, overwhelming the intruders before they could recover. The camp erupted in shouts, but the fight was brief. When the dust settled, the three men lay bound and beaten, their threats silenced. The two boys were freed, clinging to their mothers with trembling sobs. Eliza stood frozen, her hands blistered, her heart racing. The pot lay dented at her feet, stew sizzling in the dirt. Taza turned to her slowly. For the first time, his face was not carved from stone. There was something else there, something fierce and unexpected. "You carry more fire than I thought," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. Whispers rippled through the camp. This time, they weren't laced with suspicion. They carried awe. Respect. The old woman with silver braids stepped close, her sharp eyes softer now. She spoke to Taza, who translated with a slight incline of his head. "She says the fire in your veins may be what saves us yet." Eliza's chest tightened. She hadn't come here to be a savior. She had come here to survive. But under the stars, surrounded by a people who had begun to look at her differently, she wondered if survival was only the beginning. Dawn spilled across the desert in ribbons of gold and crimson, painting the cliffs in fire. Eliza stood at the edge of the Apache camp, dust fire at her side, and breathed air that tasted different, freer, sharper, alive. The events of the night still echoed in her mind. The intruders, the boiling stew, the warrior's eyes when he said she carried fire. The camp had changed. She felt it in the way people looked at her now. No longer with suspicion alone, but with something steadier acknowledgement. Respect. Children no longer hid behind their mothers when she passed. Instead, they tugged at her ragged dress, asking questions she couldn't understand but felt in their eagerness. The old woman with silver braids approached at sunrise. Her gaze was no less sharp, but softer at its edges. She placed a hand on Eliza's shoulder and spoke words that needed no translation. The warmth in her eyes said it all. "You are one of us, if you choose to be." But choice was a heavy thing. Taza appeared soon after, emerging from the shadows like a figure carved from the land itself. Shirtless, powerful, long black hair lifted by the morning wind, bone necklaces clinking faintly against his chest, he looked as eternal as the desert. "You are restless," he said, his voice steady, unreadable. Eliza turned, meeting his dark gaze. "I don't belong anywhere. Not to Hollow Creek. Not fully here either." He studied her, long and unblinking. Then he gestured to the horizon where the desert stretched endless and wild. "Belonging is not a place. It is the fire you carry. Some will see it and fear it. Others will follow it." His words settled deep, but her heart wavered. She thought of Hollow Creek, its dust-choked streets, its cruel laughter, its doors that had slammed in her face. There was nothing left there but hunger and disdain, and yet, walking fully into this new life meant leaving behind the last threads of the one she had known. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hooves. From the canyon's edge, riders appeared, more settlers, rifles slung over shoulders, faces hard. A patrol searching for the 3 men taken captive the night before. The camp tensed. Women pulled children back, warriors readied weapons. The air turned sharp with the scent of danger. One of the settlers rode forward, his voice loud and commanding. "We're here for our men. Give them over, and we'll leave." Taza stepped forward, broad shoulders squared, his spear gleaming in the sun. He did not flinch. "Your men brought war. They stay." The rider sneered, spitting in the dirt. "Then we'll burn you out." The camp braced, warriors forming a wall of defiance. Eliza's heart pounded. She knew this dance had always ended in blood. And then she realized something. She was not powerless here. These settlers would dismiss Apache words, but they might hear hers. She was the bridge. She had to be. Drawing a deep breath, Eliza stepped forward, placing herself between the 2 lines. Her voice shook at first but grew stronger with each word. "These men are no victims. They attacked children. They brought violence into this camp. If you claim them, you claim their crimes." The settlers muttered among themselves, taken aback. One man shouted, "Why stand with them, girl? You're one of us." Her voice cracked like a whip. "I was never one of you. Not when you let Emmy starve. Not when you turned your backs. Here I worked, I bled, I fought. Here I was seen." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Faces hardened, but not one settler advanced. The rider cursed, spat again, and finally jerked his reins. With a sharp signal, they turned and rode off. Dust trailing like smoke, the camp exhaled as one. Taza's eyes lingered on Eliza, unreadable but blazing with something fierce. "You chose," he said softly. Her chest tightened, but for the first time in years it wasn't from fear. It was from knowing that she had stood and not fallen as the sun climbed higher. Children laughed again, fires crackled, and life resumed. Eliza walked among them. No longer an outsider, but not fully Apache either, something in between. Something new. Dust fire nudged her shoulder, warm breath against her cheek. She smiled faintly, stroking the Mari's mane. "We found a place. Didn't we, girl?" From across the camp, Taza watched her, his hair lifting in the wind, his chest proud and scarred. His presence like the desert itself, unyielding, eternal. And for the first time, Eliza didn't wonder where she belonged. She simply lived, fire in her veins, her future unbound as the horizon stretching wide before her.